Hey, this is Doug Fletcher. I'm sitting here with Aaron Cerrone. You were listening to What's the Hazard? It's Friday. I know it's Friday. I don't know what the hell day it is, but I know it's Friday, or the date. I'm unaware of
Memorial Weekend.
Memorial Weekend. You know how I found out it was Memorial Weekend? I was at your gym yesterday, and Ashley told me that the gym was closed this weekend. I said, why is the gym closed? And she goes, well, Monday's Memorial Day.
Right.
I had no idea. So you're going out of town.
Yeah, I'm heading. My son and I are hopping in the car. We're heading out to Indianapolis for the race.
Oh, fantastic, man! So and you've done this before. You and your son have gone before.
Yeah, we. This is probably the 4th or 5th year him and I have gone. But my
Nice.
family had a tradition of going forever. I had an aunt and uncle that went. Oh my gosh, for like 30 years straight.
So you grew up in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And so that was Ohio, Indiana. So it's Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana.
Yep.
That's a pretty good trip. How far was that?
Oh yeah, it took. Oh man, it was probably about 8-10 hours from the east side
from your home.
I mean, heck, it takes like 4.5-5 hours just to get across Pennsylvania.
Pretty,
right,
yeah, it is
right.
a wide state.
And so it was a trek. But I started going with my aunt and uncle when I was in 1st grade. I went every year until I was in 11th grade.
Okay.
And then I didn't go when I was in college and whatnot. Then my brother and I started going again. Probably around 2015, and then we've gone every year since again.
Oh, very cool.
But my aunt and uncle had gone for like 30 or 40 years straight. That was,
And so does your brother have a son also, or?
Yes. Yeah.
So you got the 4 of you will meet up, or
what's him and his son, and we'll meet. It's about Indianapolis is about halfway between us now.
Okay, cool.
So we'll meet halfway, and then spend the weekend, go to the race, and then hop in the car and make the arduous drive home
after the race.
Yeah, I'll usually drive probably about halfway after the race. I've Ironmanned it.
Mm-hmm.
But when it starts getting dark,
well, you were commenting,
and you're driving by yourself with an 11-year-old who's no help whatsoever keeping you awake.
Yeah. Right.
In
fact, he's got headphones.
Yeah, he's oblivious to what's going on. Or you look over at one point, he's sound asleep, drool coming out of his mouth. Right, so you can't swap out.
It is about it's about a 10-hour drive from Omaha, isn't it? 9 or 10 hours to Indy, or something like that. I've made that drive because Nick goes to school or went to school in Indy, and so we would make that drive. And you were commenting, man. I used to be able to drive cross country, no problem as a young man. Just get some caffeine going, take some Vibrant, as you reminded me. Remember the handful of Vibrant or something? Oh, man. And then just plow,
Sure.
I cannot do that. Well, for one thing, I can't drive past a rest stop anymore because, I'm old. So you just cannot. I mean, I pull off at every rest stop.
How about the old school days with their parents where they told you to pee in a bottle because dad didn't want to stop?
We did.
He just kept going.
Yeah, peed in a mason jar, basically.
Going. Just keep going. I can't, my thing is that in college, I used to drive. I went to college in Colorado Springs, so I would drive from I drove from Colorado Springs to Pennsylvania one time nonstop like an idiot. Like you said, eating Vibrant along the way.
Oh, that's like a 20-hour.
I got to, I remember this clearly. I got to Ohio, in fact, and I started shaking, and I pulled. I literally pulled over. I found a little place on the side of the road. I pulled over on the side of the road and just slumped over and passed out. And I woke up like 2 hours later, like, oh, where am I?
Oh yeah.
And then I was like, well, I just started it back up and kept going.
I used to do that. I pulled over and just fall asleep in the rest stop for an hour, and you wake up to some dude like looking at you through your car window or something, whatever. It's tough, man.
Well, I fully understand why they made federal mandate truck drivers had to stop and rest for 10 hours.
Absolutely.
Because for me, as soon as it starts getting dark is when I'm like, oh my gosh, it's hard for me to stay awake driving.
Well, I mean, these are the natural circadian sleep patterns, man. I mean, when it gets dark, you sleep, and you can't necessarily fight that off just because you don't want to fall asleep.
Even after a while, no amount of energy drink will keep me up. I just start falling asleep. It's just the mundane act of driving.
And driving from like Nebraska to Indiana or Pennsylvania is a pretty boring drive, frankly.
I drove one time for whatever reason, coming from Colorado Springs. I always took 80 because 80 would drop me off not far from my house.
Right.
And for whatever reason, in my youth, I was like, I want to try a different route. So I decided to go 70 across Kansas.
That's even worse.
You talk about contemplating suicide. and I don't mean to talk about suicide lightly, but I have never been so bored, I think, in my life driving across Kansas on 70.
Yeah, that's a rough go.
You start hallucinating.
Yeah.
I'm like, I thought I drove by the same cow 3 times. I didn't know. It's terrible.
Well, and then you go into Missouri and 70 in Missouri between Kansas City and St. Louis may be the worst stretch of road in the country.
I got pulled over in the middle of Kansas, and I was just driving, not paying any attention. And you start going fast. I mean, it's a straight. You could fall asleep and probably not drive off the road. And I was just kind of going around cars, and all of a sudden, I see the cop lighting me up, and I use my signal to get over. And of course, he pulls over, and he's like, "Bit of a hurry?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm just trying to get home." He's like, "You don't seem to like using your signal till I pulled you over." And I was like, "I'm sorry, I'm just driving around here." He's like, "It's pretty reckless driving around here like that." And I just, without thinking, I go, "What am I going to hit?"
Right. There's nothing out there. There isn't another car between me and the horizon.
And I'm like, there's literally maybe an oil rig that I randomly passed by. He didn't care for that comment, but I got a ticket.
It is true though, man. It is. And something about that, as you said, the mundane or just the repetitiveness of it. It's the same for 500 miles. I mean, that's kind of the same thing. I'm not actually trying to even stretch this into the workplace, but I think it's no different than the guy that has a job that's very routine and repetitive.
Oh, 100%.
Your mind goes somewhere else and you start to drift, and you can't always control that.
Any mundane task, you just start to daydream. I mean, how many times have we driven home from work and then don't remember the drive?
Mm-hmm.
You pull into your driveway and you're like, how the hell did I get here?
Yeah.
You remember leaving work and you remember pulling in your driveway. Right. And then happens, especially, and then now you multiply that by the length of the day. And then if you're operating heavy machinery or dangerous equipment, it's easy to see how accidents happen. That's why, I teach a concept called flexible workforce, which is if you work for me and you're working a piece of machinery, I'll try to train you on as many pieces of machineries as possible so I can move you around.
Mm-hmm.
So we prevent that repetitiveness, that mundane, that boring work where your mind starts to drift. I'm moving you around a little bit. And that's why breaks are important. That's why the law mandates we take breaks.
Mm-hmm.
What is it on an 8-hour day? A 15-minute break and a 10-minute break? Is that still the rule?
Not in Nebraska, but they don't even require breaks in Nebraska, to my knowledge, which is unfortunate. They do. And I'm not a wage and hour guy, but there are certain requirements for lunch breaks if you work beyond a certain number of hours per day, but I don't know if you're required.
If I remember right, and who's ever listening,
this might be a Fed
let us know. When I was working at a company, now we were doing 12-hour shifts, but if I remember right, on an 8-hour shift, you had to have a half-hour lunch, a 15-minute break, and a 10-minute break.
Okay.
But if it extended beyond that, you had to add another 15-minute break.
It could be.
Something like that.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in that stuff, man.
But it makes sense, right? Because you got to get people up, you got to get them moving around.
Well, and you make a really interesting comment, man, because in the safety world, we do a lot of job rotation to try to limit ergonomic stressors. If you're doing the same thing over and over, it can really be it can wear on you physically, but it can wear on you mentally as well. And that's 100%. An aspect. So this job rotation thing.
No, it's huge. And it's not in dangerous work environments. And think about just in the office, like how many times in college did you wake up laying on your keyboard? Right? You were typing a paper and all of a sudden you wake up, you're laying on your keyboard. Just sitting at a desk and just looking at the screen all day wears you out mentally, and you just forget what you're doing. And before you know it, you were staring at the screen for 10 minutes, not doing anything. Haven't moved.
Haven't blinked.
So you have to get up and walk around. You gotta hit the reset button. And that's why when you're driving, you pull over and get up, walk around a little bit, go out, get something to drink. Force yourself to stop.
I drive a state-of-the-art Subaru, as you have seen in your parking lot many times. Yeah, and it's interesting because the Subaru tells me when the car has been on for 2 hours. And so I think hey, man, you're probably asleep. That's right. I think it should be like snapping his fingers or something just to wake me up. But I think the intention is that, you've been driving for 2 hours, take a break. Yeah. And actually, it's not ill-conceived. I mean, I don't love it when it does that, but it's not an ill-conceived concept. The technology, the driver assistance technology, the trucking industry has really pushed this really hard. The driver assistance to make sure people are staying awake, make sure they're taking their breaks, making sure they're staying in the lane, especially big trucks like that. Because I teach supply chain, there's going to be a shortage of truckers in the next 5 to 10 years of upwards of 200,000 truckers. And when that happens, we're in trouble big time because everything moves by truck.
at some point.
It does.
But this idea of autonomous trucking, companies in town here, Werner for one, are really on the cutting edge of autonomous trucking. But that kind of scares me, a vehicle that big driving by itself. But the drive towards that has brought in a lot of technology to help drivers stay awake, stay in the lane.
Yeah, the lane assist,
all that stuff I think is fantastic. And even if it's just something that vibrates the steering wheel every so often to make sure you're staying awake.
That's a good point.
I think it's hugely important. Just these long haul truckers, driving 15, 16 hours a day before they have to take their 10-hour break. I think it's huge. And so technology, I'm not sure I feel safe at driving by itself. Yeah. We're going that way. It's going to be that way, but
we were over at the Midwest Safety Cooperative, had a meeting last night over at CLAAS, the combine plant here in Omaha, assembly plant.
Speaking of autonomous vehicles.
Yeah. And so that came up during the conversation. These combines are so sophisticated, and with all the GPS and all of that tracking.
They're amazing.
And the technology to have them drive autonomously, you can basically drive it around your plot of land, your field once, and then just turn it loose. And
sure, one of my students works for CLAAS. He's actually over in Germany now.
Oh, really?
And they sent him over there. He's one of the head trainers, teaching people how to fix and operate these things. And he would show me videos all the time where they would have a combine, and then the trailers where would throw whatever was harvesting in, and these trailers would be lining up, and this thing's driving autonomously. The trailer will come up. When it's full, it leaves. Another one pulls up, all autonomously. And
that's ridiculous, man.
Which, if you think about the efficiency of harvesting and planting, and you can just GPS them and set them, thousands of acres, which is fine because a combine's not going to run over anybody out there.
You would hope not.
You would hope not. Right. So that doesn't scare me as much as a tractor trailer loaded to the gills
running down Interstate 80
and hits a turn too fast. Right. But at the same time, you could argue that computers are more intelligent and safer than people.
In all likelihood, yeah.
In all likelihood, that's why we automate as fast as we can.
Well, that's interesting you say that, and I think those are fascinating concepts. I think I would love it if they actually perfected that technology out in a cornfield somewhere rather than down Interstate 80. So they can maybe adapt those technologies to the tractor
which
trailer
is always
world.
Fascinating to me, the crossover of industries, where you don't realize a lot of technology we use was probably propagated in the agriculture industry or in this industry over here, and then it filtered its way over into everyday use. So you'll see a lot of that stuff agriculture is working on will filter out into everyday use, and I think that's amazing. And it's the beauty of especially in business, you can't just pigeonhole yourself into your industry. Like I run a martial arts school, but if I only looked at what other martial arts schools are doing, I would never improve. I can take something from what a construction company is doing. I can take something from what a farmer's doing and apply it into my area.
That's interesting you say that too, man, because I've been doing this safety stuff for 35 years, and you become very pigeonholed. You become basically trained to think in a certain way. And you almost have to look outside of the realm of that safety profession, into psychology, into process improvement, into those areas to try to find ways to continue to improve this stuff. Because, when you've been doing it for a while, you just kind of get into a lane and you just.
Yeah, it's like anything else. You realize how far reaching it can be. But it's easy to stay in a box and stay within your expertise, just all of us in general. But then you realize, wow, there is a psychology piece to this, which is when we had Katrina on here. I was like, okay, yeah, there's that piece, and there's a leadership piece, there's a management piece. And now you start to see it as a larger whole. You see the aggregate of what's happening in the safety realm rather than just
that
like the safety program.
Piece.
And now it takes a bigger life of its own. Yeah. But now it can be more effective. And now you can attack it in different ways, and you can appeal to people in different ways, and you can get people to adapt and apply it in different ways. So everything benefits as a result.
Yeah.
But it's always funny to me. It's like, oh, well, that's what construction people do. It's like, okay, you're in banking, but they have a very good methodology. Why can't you apply it over here?
Absolutely. I think that's cool. And I think we do have to kind of get out of our lane in order to find opportunities to improve sometimes, because we do get really focused on what we know.
And I think that's why I'm a big fan of networking. In teaching in a business college, I think networking is huge, just because you get to hear other ideas or bounce ideas, and you hear other people talk, and you're like, wow, I hadn't thought of that. Well, that's a pretty good idea. I wonder if I can apply it over here. Or you can just, hey, how'd you guys do that? And then start talking, and you figure out, wow, I could do that where I'm at.
Yeah.
And networking with other industries, so from the safety standpoint, lots of different industries have different approaches to safety. Get out and talk to people. Like, go to networking events, join networking groups, just kind of pick people's brains as to what's going on and how they're doing things. It's real easy for a safety manager in a construction company only to focus on other construction companies and talk to other safety managers in construction companies. Right. And you start to just sit in that lane and not go, okay, well, there's safety all around us.
Yeah.
How are the truckers doing it? How
do they do it in healthcare? How do they do it in industry?
How are the marinas doing it? Like, how, there's issues everywhere. And it's like, man, that's a great way of going about tackling this issue.
Exactly. Well, that's kind of the whole point of this program. That's kind of the point of like the Midwest Safety Cooperative we started a couple years ago. We just have a group of safety people and people on the periphery of safety, leadership people, suppliers, whatever. And every other month we go visit a different shop and look at how they do things. And I know that some of the safety folks last night that were at class looking around for the first time, that they'd been in an assembly facility like that, they were looking at things going, oh, wow, that's kind of interesting how you do that. I personally love that. I think that's a great approach.
Well, that's the benefit in learning from others and just when you see something new.
Where did that benchmarking concept come from? We used to call that benchmarking, where you would.
It's 100%. Yeah.
Is it a Japanese thing, or where did that come from?
Man, I have no idea the history of it. It likely is. It likely is. When it comes to industry and efficiency, most everything tends to come from that part of the world. Benchmarking takes on a couple of different meanings. Benchmarking is, you look at it like, okay, what's the gold standard out there? Can we achieve that? Benchmarking is what's the industry standard, right? So you'll have an industry standard, like what we call the minimums. Everybody has to do these things. So that's a benchmark that we have to achieve. But then you look at, okay, who's doing it the best? Okay, that's a benchmark,
right?
As well. And let's everybody try to get there. And generally speaking, when a company figures out how to do something really well, everybody races to catch up. Right. So what we call a winner, like your company does something that separates you from everybody else and you start to win. And then everybody goes, we got to catch up. Right. And everybody starts to do it as well. And now that becomes what we call a qualifier or the new benchmark.
Okay.
So like winners always become qualifiers because everybody catches up, which is how the industry gets better and better and better. Like it's an arms race. You're raising the stakes. Right? I figure out how to do something. Everybody will catch up eventually. Now the real goal is what we call our competitive advantage, is to figure out how to do something everybody else can't copy.
Right.
But in the safety realm, we do want to copy, right? That's really not something we should keep to ourselves across the board.
That's a great point.
Right. Now, safety can be a competitive advantage, right? We're much safer than everybody else, and we're more efficient probably because of that. And because of that, we keep our costs down. So that can be a competitive advantage for sure. But in terms of the greater good and humanity, I would hope that safety professionals are sharing
they do
information
really
more than keeping, and those benchmarks are all raising together, right? When somebody figures something out and it's working really well, we share it and everybody adapts it or adopts it. That
really is, again, an interesting point, because safety folks do tend to be more generous with their information, and perhaps it's not as tightly held as, like when we were at class last night, and Joanne Hayworth, one of the engineers over there, was giving us the tour primarily and talking about the fact that, Claas is a German company. It has a very German culture. There are a lot of things that they are not comfortable sharing, operationally, procedurally, but from a safety standpoint, why would you conceal some of those things? As you said, I mean, if you're good at it and you're doing it, you're probably able to pass the benefits of that program on to your customers, either through cost savings or whatever that is. But yeah, safety folks tend to be very generous with the ideas because they probably got it from somewhere else as well.
That and truth told, safety is not a revenue generating center.
At least it doesn't appear to be.
So your senior leaders aren't as tight about it as you're not giving away a trade secret. it's not making us money. So you're not giving up anything in terms of advantage in the market or the industry.
Right.
So it makes sense that safety is more generous with what we're doing. I can see how they would keep their operations tight. I can see how they would because how you do things can be a huge competitive advantage, how efficient you are. Because we can have similar products, or you can have a better product than me, but if I can do it better, which means I can get it to market quicker, faster, cheaper, more efficiently, I don't need to sell as much as you to beat you.
Right.
So how I do things can be a huge competitive advantage. That's one thing we always preach in our operations classes. Like, I can't control the market, but I can control how I do things. And if I'm very smart and very efficient and keep my costs down and my waste down, and I can keep my margins up, I don't need to sell as much as the next guy or the next girl to beat them. And they can have a better product and I can still beat them. So I can understand how a company wants to keep that tight. Which makes sense that at the same time, hey, safety really doesn't necessarily do that for us. So like, safety doesn't help us gain market share.
It's not a generating revenue source.
But it can help our margins.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. Because it's saving us money on the back end.
That's a concept that can be difficult to explain at times. I mean, I think, when you're talking, and you have mentioned this before, when you're talking to different target audiences, you have to approach the information differently. If you're talking to a CFO or a COO or whatever that might be. But the concept that safety pays, this is kind of a concept that we used to preach when I was with OSHA, that there are direct cost to accidents, there are indirect cost to accidents. They can be incredibly expensive. Yeah. But it's not a profit center. So why am I going to throw a bunch of money into this up front?
I think a better safety pays isn't as accurate as safety saves.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, that's a good point.
Not just saves lives, but saves a whole lot of money.
That's a great, you're right.
Because that's a total cost when an accident happens. You're never getting it back. It's a total cost, which there's no ROI on it.
Right.
Once you have to pay to fix whatever gets fixed, and once you have to pay all the comps and any legal fees, and then any payouts. So safety definitely saves.
That's a good point.
Pocketbook.
Yeah, I prefer that. Actually, that expression is better.
You can parlay it in other stuff too. We should probably copyright that.
Yeah. Okay. Cam, can you copyright that for us while we're doing this? Thanks, man. But that is a great point, and certainly the way you express that makes a difference in how people receive that information.
Sure.
So, and it does save a lot of money. I'm dealing with a client right now that had a bad accident, unfortunately. And so as we are discussing how to deal with this, how to take care of the employee, there are issues to take care of this employee, make sure he gets the care and treatment that he needs. And then there are issues with OSHA. How do we deal with OSHA? That regulatory piece, and then the insurance piece, and all those other, and time, money.
Well, I mean, just think about the cost to bring you in, right? But by no means, but follow me on this one. By no means do I want you to be out of work. But at the same time, in an ideal world, you do want yourself to be out of work.
Ultimately, that is the objective.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I would love to be out of business. Yeah. In respect that the whole country's healthy and not overweight and not diabetic, but there's a need for things that I do. There's a need for things that you do. And it's unfortunate. And I mean, the utopia is we'd be out of work, right? And any type of service industry in which we're trying to take a preventative approach to things, or damage control in a lot of cases. But, it is what it is. So, I mean, that's the importance of it, so that, hey, we can potentially eliminate some of these things, right? Some of these costs at the end of the day, and sometimes they're not a lot, and sometimes they're to the point where we'll bankrupt a company if you're not careful. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've seen catastrophic accidents where that company's not going to recover from that.
Right. They do close down oftentimes, unfortunately.
Whether that's because of the lawsuits after the fact, whatever happens to be, but it just is what it is.
Yeah. It can be incredibly damaging. So that's an interesting segue. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to talk about this or not.
Which none of these segues are planned, by the way.
None of this is just totally free form stream of consciousness stuff. But when you mentioned that, it leads us to a discussion of personal accountability, when we talk about what I do and we talk about what you do professionally, what we are really talking about is in the absence of personal accountability sometimes, or knowledge, or a combination of both of those, companies, individuals, whatever, needs some guidance, some direction.
Sure.
So when we have to worry about people hurting themselves at work, that may be because of a lack of knowledge, or it may be a lack of personal accountability. Perhaps when we're talking about wellness, your
Right.
world, fitness, wellness, health, that's kind of what embodies martial arts in large part. You know, this personal accountability piece, man, it almost seems to me like people are becoming less personally accountable. Do you see that?
That's Pandora's box you just opened.
Well, I know, man, but
and I'm going to broad brush a little bit here. So don't attack me if this,
no, man,
if you feel personally insulted, because I'm not necessarily talking directly to everybody watching here or listening. I think there's a sentiment across the board that younger generations now are less accountable, or they take less responsibility for their actions. Again, that's not across the board, but I think that's a general sentiment amongst the older generations. Now, our parents probably said the same thing about us.
Sure.
But I think we're in a world right now where it's more of a me-centric approach, that as long as I get what I want, everything's great, and less cognizant of how I'm affecting others, which is kind of funny considering all the movements that are out there about respecting other people and not offending other people. But I think at the same time, we've almost become more closed-minded in that, well, I'm okay, so I don't care how I affected you in respect. So if I make mistakes, I'm going to point the finger before I'll point it at me. And again, I'm broad brushing, but a lot of times, and I think this falls on management personally. Like, this is a leadership issue 100%, which everybody's gonna be like, well, you always make it a leadership issue. But people take cue, right? Kids take cue from their parents or older siblings. Students take cue from the teacher in the room. Employees take cue from the managers and senior leadership. And if senior leadership isn't being accountable and taking responsibility, we're crazy to think anybody else will.
That's a great point.
So when something happens on the job site, and I've talked about this, when something happens on the job site, if I'm the manager or leader, I shouldn't say who screwed up. First words on my mouth should be, is everybody okay? Okay, how do we fix this? Now, and then in my mind, the first question I'm asking is, how did I fail them?
Right.
Did we not have the procedures in place? Did I not train these people right? Did I set them up for failure? Was this equipment not properly maintained? Like, how did I fail them? That should be the first thing that comes into my mind, not who screwed up and fire them because they didn't follow the procedures or they're always been a pain in the ass. So to me, that's an accountability piece that then filters down, that if I'm willing to stand up and say, okay, we had an accident, everybody, here's what happened. We as a company failed because we didn't do these things. Okay. And we are going to fix this. Not Doug. You guys know Doug. He's always half-assing it, and he walked in on an hour's sleep, hungover, and we knew he was going to get hurt eventually. To me, that's passing the blame. That's not. I'm not being accountable, and if I'm not being accountable up top, I can't expect everybody below me to be accountable. Right? It just doesn't make sense.
Right. Absolutely. That's such a good comment, man. Such a good comment. If you expect employees to step up and take responsibility for things, they need to see you take responsibility when it's a system failure or a company failure. And you're right. The question should be, how did I fail these employees? How did this happen as a result of something that I did or didn't do?
I actually had,
that's huge.
I worked for a fairly large company in town. I'll keep the name out of it to protect the guilty. They're not innocent. They're guilty. But it was an IT company, and I was working, and I was working in their operations / command center, whatever you want to call it. And they would routinely, just the culture of the place, that if somebody messed up, it was always, hey, one of your people messed up, correct it. That was kind of the culture. Hey, they messed up. And I heard many times that we're not hiring the right people. we're not hiring the right people. People are messing up or having errors. We're not hiring the right people.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, and it was funny, I eventually left because of this culture, but I would get called in the office by my boss and say, one of your people messed up. And I would go, well, what's telling us they messed up? Well, so-and-so on the other shift said they screwed it up. I said, okay, well, what's the standard? What's the procedure they messed up? I don't have time to argue about this. Just go fix it and yada, yada. I'm like, okay, so we're taking hearsay. People are pointing fingers. How do we know they didn't mess it up? Everybody's just passing the blame. And at the end of the day, they would, just not, hey, are we training? What happened here? Is it not training? Is the procedure wrong? Was there a misunderstanding of information? Did we have wrong information? It was just that person screwed up. Get rid of them or take care of them. So as a result, there was a lot of turnover, a huge amount of turnover.
And a huge distrust.
And a huge distrust. And there's not just in turnover at the lower level employees, but the next level management. And it was just amazing that I would always try to say, hey, we need some level of understanding of standardization, because we're saying this person messed up, but there's no standard at which we're doing this thing. Everybody's just finger pointing. And are we training these people right? And there's no standard operating procedures. And I actually had a director level person tell me verbatim, I don't want to hear any more about training. There's training out there. They need to go find it. And if they can't find it, we're not hiring the right people.
Wow.
And I was like, are you really saying it's their fault? And I actually blurted out, I go, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard, which is why I didn't work there much longer. But the point was, it's like, well, what do you mean we're not hiring the right people? Like, you have to invest in people. Right. You have to admit, yeah, you screwed up, but you screwed up because we didn't train you properly, or
you're setting them up for failure. We put you in
a position which you didn't have the tools to do it, or you were brand new on the system and we threw you out there on an island by yourself, or yes, looking at the scenario, the information led you down this path, or this person, you have to acknowledge this person didn't want to take responsibility, so he threw it off on you. But it was always pointing at, it was the employee's fault. They screwed up, and the place sucked the work in. It was a toxic environment to the definition. And of course, that company got a reputation. It is what it is. But it's such an easy fix. And I got reprimanded because I was told I was making excuses for my people by simply asking the question, well, what's telling me they screwed up?
So what is the fix?
Well, the fix is, it goes back to that accountability piece. It's going back to, okay, we had something bad happen. Rather than point blame, let's fix the problem, right? In the case of the IT world, let's get it fixed. Or if there's an accident on site, let's make sure everybody's okay, right? And now let's take a step back and ask what happened, okay? And then the next question is, okay, is it something we didn't do or we as a company could have prevented? And most of the time, the answer is yes. Now, yes, you and I both know there's idiots out there not paying attention, and dumb people do dumb stuff. And I hate to say that, but it is what it is, right?
That happens.
It happens. People aren't paying attention and they forgot to tether off. Okay. Yeah, that's on that person. But at the same time, it's like, okay, do we have is it habitual people forgetting to tether off? Now to me, that's a company problem. Like what, are we not getting this message out? So we need to step back and say, okay, we had this accident. Let's fix it. Let's make sure everybody's okay. Now let's step back and start asking the question, how did we cause this?
Something systemically in our procedures or training or something typically.
Do we rush this person through training, which we're starting to see now because everybody's hurting on employees? Are we rushing them through training? Can't get them on the job site fast enough? Do we have the latest equipment, safety equipment? Is the equipment being maintained properly? Right. It could be a number of things that we
That's exactly right, man.
And that's the first questions that should be asked. Now, if you cascade through that, and at the end of the day, you go, no, that person just forgot to do X, Y, or Z. Okay, that's fine. I'm not saying you never lay blame or you never.
It never lands on the employee. Sometimes it
never
does.
lands on the employee, because sometimes it truly does.
Yeah.
They showed up drunk. Okay.
Yeah.
Clearly or they showed up high, or whatever happens to be under the influence. But even then, there should be checks and balances in place where I would ask if I'm a senior level manager and I found out this person was intoxicated on the job site, I'm going to go, how did we let him get out there to begin with? Or how do we let her get out there under the influence?
Right.
They had to go by several people. Right. Did we have our meeting at the beginning of the day and check in and have our one-on-one? Did we at some point somebody had the cross pass and nobody said something? So to me, now that's a problem. That's where we failed. We have a failure there too. It's on them for showing up like that, but we have a failure there too. Right. And to me, that's the accountability piece that I'm talking about. How did we fail? Now, what are we going to do to prevent that from happening again? This is great, man. And that's where you get up and say, okay, guys, we had an accident on the site. Yeah. Joey or Sally showed up drunk and backed over somebody with a forklift. It's terrible. It's tragic. Luckily, nobody got hurt. Okay. But, okay, we messed up. How did we let this person get on that forklift inebriated? Right. That's something we got to figure out and fix. I admit that we need to fix this. Yeah. And now we're taking accountability for it and not just going, we fired him and it should be fine. Right. Right. Because that's the easy fix. We fired him. It should be fine. And that's the typical fix in my experience. And, we call this incident investigation. When you do this, if you're reacting to an incident, perhaps something that's happened, either a near miss or an actual injury, something recordable, perhaps whatever that is, if we're being reactive, or if we've even found something on a job site, something hazardous, something that has appeared on the job site, and we do some kind of an incident investigation of, why this happened, why it's present. It's so common for the investigation to stop at, well, the employee did something stupid. And that's where we stop, and that's what we write down. Employee did something stupid. The corrective action was told the employee not to do something stupid in the future. And or fired the employee. Or we fired the employee, and we think we've made a change here. But if you drill down deeper, if you ask why, why did the employee do that, or why, whatever, you'll get to something underlying like you've just described. It's either a procedural issue, a training issue, maybe we've equipped them poorly, whatever that is, but there's something that we probably didn't do that led to that. In the past, if you think about it, now, the environment's a little bit different now with the workforce shortage, but in the past, what was the easy, cheap thing to do? Just fire the person. Hire another person. Fire them, hire another person. What was more expensive? Taking time to figure out what the problem was, come up with a new process or procedure, training to it, implementing it. It's just cheaper to get rid of them and get somebody else. And managers don't always like to point the finger at themselves either. No, nobody likes to blame. Leaders probably do. Managers, not necessarily. I think. It's hard. Tend to not like to admit fault. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to say, "Oh, I screwed up," or we screwed up. So because everybody, you feel like the feeling of being infallible after a while, but it's changing now a little bit because of the workforce shortage, and you don't want to fire people as quickly because if you can get anybody to replace the person, it's getting more expensive to bring people on. Yeah. So now it kind of begs the question, hey, okay, what do we got to do to keep people? Retention's huge. Right. So we don't want to fire people, but if there's mistakes happening, now we have to understand, okay, what do we got to put in place? What do we got to change to start preventing this stuff? I don't mean to, I just wanted to ask you about, I don't want to change horses in the middle of this stream necessarily, but we're on the subject of personal accountability. In your world, in the health, fitness, discipline world, I listen to podcasts all the time when I'm driving, right? Safety podcasts. I listen to a variety of different things. I listen to a lot of health and wellness type podcasts, and I was listening. These statistics were quoted by the podcaster. I'm going to read these to you. Okay. And I don't want to, this is not necessarily the path that we typically go down, but I just want to, it addresses personal accountability. Sure. So in 1960, 1 in 100 persons were diabetic. 1995, 1 in 50 persons diabetic. 2015, 1 in 8 persons diabetic. The forecast for 2050 is 1 in 3 people will be diabetic. Right, and that's diagnosed diabetic. Diagnosed. That's not talking about undiagnosed or what we consider pre-diabetic. Yes. Which is really diabetic. This person went on to say that 70% of diabetics have heart disease or some circulatory issue, 100%. Cardiovascular issue. And by 2026, the financial burden to the United States healthcare system will be $650 billion. Right. Now,
part of this is personal accountability to some degree, but I mean, part of it is just like, I just find this amazing that, is it just our food culture? Is it, I mean,
it's a number of things.
I mean, people are unaware perhaps of some of these things, nutrition. I mean,
there's a lot of
what's
moving
going
parts
on, man?
here. There's a lot of moving parts. And here's what I'll say. You're not really changing horses midstream, because this drastically affects the work environment.
Absolutely.
Because all these people work.
All of these, well, yeah, most of them are
so
in
all
the
these
workforce.
People work,
in the
and they're all bringing these health issues into the workplace.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, again, when we talk workman's comp, we talk downtime, we talk sick time, we talk out of the office, unproductive time.
Mm-hmm.
This is huge for the workplace.
But what's going on, man? I mean, why?
So it's a number of things, right? It's easy to say when you look at somebody who is overweight, out of shape, it's easy to say, oh, they're just lazy. And that may be true to some degree. But there's also, there truly are medical conditions out there in which people cannot control. Type 1 diabetics, right? That they're born with that, right? That's not something. The majority of this is type 2 diabetic, which you can argue is self-induced
and acquired.
It's a direct result of eating poorly and lack of activity. But I wouldn't even say lack of activity. It's more just eating poorly. Your body can no longer process the sugars that you are taking in. Now, why does that happen? Well, if you really want to do a history lesson, it's decades long of misinformation and misunderstanding of how the human body works and what is considered good nutrition. All of which the dogma of the food pyramid has been challenged in a major way in the last 5 to 10 years. Now, what has spawned that? Well, the internet, YouTube, people with dissenting opinions are now getting their information out. And the dogma of the food pyramid, I'm just going to use that as the foundation. And going back to accountability, the medical community does not like to admit they were wrong. They hate it.
Right. Yeah, that's hard for them. Hate it.
And for them to say that, hey, we've been wrong about nutrition all along is a tough ask. Truth told, most doctors, and we all like to listen to our doctor, most doctors have next to no training in nutrition. They get maybe one class for a few weeks their entire 4 years of medical school. And their undergrad, there's maybe one class. How do I know this? Because I just took a nutritional foundations class, and the teacher actually sent out an email. This is an undergrad level class saying, hey, everybody, thanks for coming to this class. As you know, most of you, this is going to be the only nutrition class you get for your entire medical career. And I was like, oh, my gosh. The fact that you're even admitting that blows my mind. So the knowledge, and it's not their fault, just the knowledge wasn't there because Western medicine, we always treat after the fact. We always treat the symptoms, and we don't like to prevent.
Right.
And nutrition is preventative.
There's a lot less money in prevention than there is in treatment.
So there's been decades and decades of misinformation of what is considered healthy eating. And in the studies now that were done that produce the food pyramid, that produce all the nutrition labeling, are being challenged. And being challenged not just by the medical community, but by the psychological community. Psychologists now, because our mental health has been on the rise for
mental
decades,
health issues and
depression and suicide continue to rise, and treatments aren't working, and medicines aren't working like they would like them to. Started looking at for what else is causing this, and nutrition was a natural place to look. So psychologists started looking at the old studies. Now, the beauty of that is you no longer have the people who did the studies looking at them. You no longer have the self-looking ice cream cone of the medical community supporting those studies. You have this third eye, psychologists looking at it, and they're looking at just from a purely, if nothing else, hey, we want to learn and understand nutrition, and they research as well, so they understand data and research. And
scientific method.
The scientific method. Well, they're looking at these old studies and go, these are bullshit. They're not even real studies.
Yeah.
They're not randomized controlled trials. It's anecdotal epidemiological evidence at best, right? They're drawing loose conclusions at best. And now they're coming out speaking against it, saying these studies are crap. It's not true. And then they're finding out that of all the data was selectively omitted on purpose because it didn't support
the conclusions that they wanted.
The conclusions that they wanted. Right, so not only were they bad studies, they weren't even real studies. Data was being omitted that show both sides of it. And the medical community is like, well, what do you guys know? You're psychologists. And psychologists are going, we understand data and we can read.
Right.
And so now new studies are starting to come out. Controlled trials are starting to come out. Now, we don't have the controlled trials using humans over the course of decades because people don't like to do that to humans. So they're even starting to speak out against the trials that were done with mice and rats because those are genetically engineered animals that have the metabolism of 10 times what we have. So it's just not a one-to-one correlation.
Yeah.
But information is starting to come out. So to bring this back around, how do we get to where we are? Well, it's decades and decades of making decisions based on bad information, decades and decades of just listening to our doctor blindly. And I'm not saying doctors aren't smart, but we should question doctors, just like you should question everybody else.
We should participate in that.
We shouldn't just blindly follow. And now we know doctors weren't ever trained on nutrition, so they were giving nutrition advice, which they shouldn't have been. And what we thought was healthy eating wasn't.
So maybe personal accountability isn't the issue as much as that information.
That's the foundation of the problem, right? And it's exacerbated by a number of things. Just people not having willpower to not eat the whole box of Fruit Loops.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. We've all been there. We've all been there. But so in that respect, there's some personal accountability. But I don't fault people for not knowing because you trust who you think are professionals and experts. And then you come to find out they necessarily weren't in that particular area. So that information is starting to come out, and you're starting to see there's a lot of headbutting. In the medical community and the psychology community in terms of nutrition.
It's pretty contentious right now.
It's incredibly contentious. But I think the truth is starting to surface, and the results are
so maybe there is hope, though. So the piece about personal accountability, whether it be taking care of one's health or one's safety, well-being, those kind of things, if people are given the right information, whatever that is.
So I'm going to go back.
A certain percentage of them will probably do the right thing.
I'm going to go back to my top-down comment. Remember, I said if leaders aren't accountable, nobody else will be. Well, our medical community has not been accountable. So why do we think everybody following that will be?
Right. That's a good point.
So until they get their ducks in a row and get their act together, you're starting more and more starting to come out. But there's so much contentious. When people are on both sides, the average person's like, "Well, I don't know what to believe," and rightfully so. It's not their fault. Until the medical community is willing to admit, "Yeah, we were wrong," or the American Heart Association will admit, "Yeah, all this stuff about cholesterol is kind of garbage. We were wrong," which they never will. What will happen over time, and it's unfortunate how this will work, is slowly over time, you'll see one of these agencies release a new article or a new study, and then
admitting no fault,
slowly release another one, and slowly take down one of the old ones. And over time, they'll say, "Hey, we've been saying this all along. I don't know what you're talking about." But that's going to take a decade or more. Right, because they're fighting against decades of dogma, and they don't want to admit they were wrong and make that change overnight. Because one, it'll freak people out, and two, they'll have to wholeheartedly admit that. Let's not sugarcoat it. There's a lot of money involved here.
Oh yeah,
there's a lot of money involved in the pharmaceuticals and the drugs and the lobbyists and the food industry because they want to keep selling food. And when you got studies that say sugar's not bad for you because there's sugars in everything, or they want to continue to sell food. So there's a lot of dynamics going on here.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because people get caught in the middle. And per your numbers, this is the ramification of it.
Yeah.
Obesity and diabetes continue to rise. Now, that said, the personal accountability piece comes in which you just follow people blindly without asking questions. People know you should stay active and exercise to be healthier. People know processed foods and sugar
are likely problems.
When people, I do talks all the time about nutrition, and I said, "Do you have any questions?" People are like, I don't understand. It's so hard for me. I don't know what to buy, and I don't understand what's healthy. And I was like, "Really? You don't know what's healthy?" So I play a game. I put up a slideshow. I'll say, "I'm going to put a picture of a piece of food up here, and you just say yes or no. Yes, it's healthy. No, it's not healthy." So I'll put up a piece of salmon. Yes. Broccoli. Yes. Donut, no. French fries, no. I go, you don't know what you need to eat? It's pretty easy, isn't it? And they all go, oh. I go, you know what's healthy, you know what's not. Right. Like, don't tell me you don't.
Yeah.
At a base foundational level. I go, so when you go around the grocery store and shop, play this game, healthy or not. No, skip it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a great point.
But here's the problem is that our friends at Kloss, good on them, have made harvesting of food much easier, and the cheaper foods tend to be less healthy for us.
Oftentimes, yeah.
Oftentimes, right?
I would agree. And more convenient. Easier.
So I understand that. You're trying to feed a family of 6. I understand that the bag of rice and the box of noodles is cheaper and you need to fill bellies. I get that. And that's a struggle in its own right.
It is.
But we can temper that. There's smart choices we can make in terms of healthy foods. And we could be here all day talking about what's healthy and not healthy. That's not the point here. But I think there's information out there. People have been misled as to what's healthy, not healthy, and that's exacerbated the problem. And the fact that the way we like to treat people, we'd rather treat the symptom than prevent and treat the cause.
Oftentimes.
Because there's a lot of money in drugs. That doesn't help either. Rather than get the diabetic to eat properly and lose weight and get off the meds, we'd rather just push more insulin.
I know. It's crazy. But bringing this full circle, bringing this around to the personal accountability piece, even in our workplaces, from a safety standpoint, from a wellness standpoint, information is powerful. And so, again, we go back to this blame the employee thing. If we're not giving the employees the information that they need, the training that they need, the procedures that they need, we can't really blame them when
100%.
they make mistakes.
100%. We cannot. And this is a slippery slope. Remember I said that the health of people does affect the workplace.
Absolutely.
So this is a slippery slope. This is where does your realm or your ring of responsibility begin and end, right? So am I only responsible for you 9 to 5 when you're working for me, or does it extend beyond that? In other words, if you go out and do something stupid and
off work,
is that my responsibility? Well, we know it is to a point, because if you're negatively impacting the company or
guy can't work or gal can't work
in a bad light, or people know you're out using recreational drugs when you're off the clock, do I want that? So there's some responsibility. So where does the health and wellness of our employees begin and end? Like if you're my employee, Doug, and I know you're diabetic and overweight and do nothing about it, is that my responsibility? I can argue yes, because it affects how you work.
Yeah, if they can't work or they don't work well or they miss a lot of work
for health issues. So now do I address that?
It certainly has an impact.
Do I try to educate you on proper nutrition? Because now it's easy for you to say, dude, you're a construction manager. Don't talk to me about nutrition. My doctor said X, Y, and Z.
Right.
But I also go, dude, you're out 2 out of every 10 days for health issues.
Right. Well, maybe they need to set up a wellness program that includes memberships to Mid-America or something.
Well, I think wellness programs need to include education.
Without question, probably the most important piece.
And what are healthy lifestyles? What's healthy eating? What is the right amount of fitness and activity?
Yeah.
And you can create a culture of healthy eating. You don't need the poppin' donuts in the break room.
Dude, so we are running out of time. Are we out of time? We are running out of time, but this is a whole nother, that's a whole nother discussion, because how many places have you worked or been or heard of workplaces where you go into the break room and there's a box of donuts,
it's just garbage,
cookies,
garbage food.
There's junk, whenever you have a birthday celebration, there's a cake. There's just an endless stream of, and believe me, I love that stuff. I love it all.
It affects the same part of the brain as cocaine.
Absolutely. In fact,
that's fact.
More for me, apparently, but it is just this constant undermining of our willpower, constant temptation. And that is really challenging. So, man, we got to wrap it up. We're going to have to carry this on to another one.
We can.
Come back in an hour. We'll do the rest of this. Good. Have a safe trip.
Thanks, buddy.
Enjoy Indy.
What are you doing this weekend?
I don't know that I'm doing anything, man. I just found out that it was Memorial Day yesterday when I was at when Ashley told me the gym was closed.
I think downtime's huge.
Downtime's very underrated. Too, and I love downtime. You know, I don't mind working hard when I'm working, but on my days when I'm not working, I just basically do nothing. I mean, and I'm really good at that, interestingly. So my wife will be working a little bit. So on those days, it'll be just me and Chuck hanging out probably.
And whatever project she gives you.
There you go. Everybody have a great, safe weekend. Cam, enjoy your trip, man. I know you're camping. Aaron, you're heading out to Indy for the race. Yep. Have a great time.
Thanks,
everybody, enjoy your weekend. If you do have time off, if you're working, be safe. And we'll talk to you again next week.
Sounds good.
Later.